Welcome to Microcap Moments, a podcast from Shore Capital Partners that highlights the stories of founders, investors, and leaders who have taken on the challenge of transforming ideas and small companies into high-growth organizations. The journey of building and scaling a business takes one down many unexpected paths. It's a journey where we learn from our mistakes, fall down often, but have the entrepreneurial grit to pick ourselves up and persevere. Within this series, we will share these stories of success and failure, of the challenges and the rewards faced by those who dare to dream big. And through their lessons learned, we hope to inspire others who are on a similar journey of becoming, growing, and leading.
In this episode, I talk with Mike Aubrey, the partner with the Shore Capital Partners search fund, Shore Search. Mike's career journey includes investment banking, working with his father managing parking lots in Detroit, being a successful searcher himself, and serving as the CEO of a Shore Capital portfolio company, Mission Veterinary Partners. Mike has found success in every phase of his career and shares practical insight on what has worked and what hasn't, in both delivering an 11 times return as a searcher and in turning a struggling vet business with 18 hospitals, no growth, 300 employees, and high turnover into an industry leader with over 330 hospitals, more than $1.2 billion in revenue, 8,000 team members, and the lowest turnover in the industry. In partnering with Shore Capital to launch the Search Fund, Mike talks about the value of the Shore ecosystem and the opportunity to build the kind of investor he dreamed of having in his own search experience. Aside from holding depths of hard-earned wisdom, Mike is both a stellar communicator and a teacher, both of which have been critical to his journey and will certainly play an important role in the success of the searchers around him. Welcome, Mike. Thanks for joining me today.
Thrilled to be here, Anderson. Good to see you.
Will you just introduce yourself and say what you do and where you do it?
Sure. My name is Michael Aubrey. I'm the partner here at Shore Search.
And give us some context to your backstory. What did you do before the search fund and how did you get connected with Shore?
Well, I'm getting old, so I'll try to make a long history brief. Started off doing investment banking. Then I worked for my father at his parking company for 4 years in Detroit, Michigan. And then I actually got a phone call from a guy named Dan Henn, who was graduating HBS in 2007. And we partnered up to form a search fund. I'll never forget the first time he called me to explain to me what a search fund was. I literally told him, I think you should ask Harvard for a refund because this is the dumbest idea I've literally ever heard, as I was parking cars in Detroit, Michigan. And so ultimately, he convinced me to fly out to Boston and took me to dinner. I'll never forget, we went to Legal Seafood, and he convinced me why search funds was such a neat opportunity for me at that point in my career. So having never gone to business school myself, partnered up with Dan in 2007, and we searched for 2 years. We found a business. We bought it after 2 years of searching. We were down to our last $17,000 of search capital. We thought we were going to have to close shop. We bought a business called StatLab Medical Products in Dallas, Texas. Ran that for 9 years. We sold it. Our investors made 11 times their money. And along the way, I met Justin Ishbia, the founder of Shore Capital, and learned about what he was doing here and frankly, his interest in the veterinary space. And so I got a phone call from my cousin who was like a pharmaceutical drug rep in the veterinary space. And he had met this veterinarian who wanted to sell and do a roll-up. And I referred the veterinarian to Justin and Shore Capital, and they did it. I didn't know that they would do the deal, but that was the platform that ultimately became MVP.
No kidding.
Yeah. And then I think as a thank you to me, they put me on the board. I obviously had no experience in veterinary medicine. I'm not sure why they put me on the board, but I guess because I referred the deal maybe. And so I was on the board for a year at MVP after I had sold StatLab, and I was unemployed anyways. And they, at one point, the board decided that we needed to bring in a CEO. And so they asked me to do it. And of course, I initially declined because I was like, no, this would be a big project.
Did they take you to Legal Seafood and talk you into it?
Exactly. And so I've been running MVP for the last 6 years. We just recapitalized the business in December. And so I'm kind of retired now, partially retired. And so Justin and I decided to do this about a year ago, and I'm thrilled to be here.
So since we're talking about search today, I have to at least go back and ask, what was this is the dumbest idea to, I'm in moment at Legal Seafood way back then? What changed your mind?
Yeah, I think the dumbest idea part was I didn't understand how we were going to buy a business that we knew nothing about. And I wasn't really interested in moving to a part of the country that I wasn't from or had no ties to. And I mean, ultimately, if you're going to do search successfully, those two things are sort of the ante to get in the poker game, if you will. And when I met with Dan, he was really smart. He introduced me to some of the longtime investors in search. And, these are folks that owned the Boston Celtics or the St. Louis Cardinals. And all of a sudden you're 27 years old and you're meeting some of these folks and they're talking to you about the success that they've had investing in the space and the mentorship and the guidance that they're going to give you along the way. And the fact that so many people had done it before and that you can learn a new business in a new industry and it is possible. And I think they opened my eyes to the possibility where I think I had maybe a fixed mindset going into the dinner. I left 48 hours later feeling like this was going to be the coolest thing that I've ever did.
And you kind of did it again with MVP, going into an industry you didn't know. Give us a little bit of context about your time at MVP and where the company was as you transitioned from board to leading the company to, you just mentioned a recent recap. Give us a brief history there of what you were able to build and grow.
Well, when MVP was founded, we had 18 hospitals, and I think it was probably 25 or 30 million in revenue. About a year in, the company was having real problems. Organic growth was negligible to trending negative. We were losing 25% of our doctors. We had staff shortages, and I think the home office really just wasn't functioning properly. And I think ultimately the board thought, hey, we've got to turn this around quickly. So when I got here, again, probably 35 million in revenue-ish. By then, maybe we had 22 practices. I don't remember exactly, but directionally, I think I'm correct. And today, it's been 6 years. Today, we have over 330 hospitals, and we're doing over 1.2 billion in revenue, 8,000 team members, and the lowest veterinary turnover in the industry. In other words, I think, arguably the happiest employees. Our recruiting is off the charts, and people want to stay. And I'm really proud of, more than anything, what the team was able to do in terms of the culture that we built.
And I know from hearing you talk about it that that's far from an accident. Will you talk a little bit about what you knew you wanted to change about what it meant to be in the veterinary business when you looked at that and said, this is how we turn this thing around?
Sure. When I got here, it's important to know that my paradigm of veterinary medicine was from the client perspective. So I like to say, before 2018, I had never been behind the receptionist counter. So I was under the impression that veterinarians charged a lot of money for their services, that they made a lot of money, and that everybody that worked in a veterinary hospital was doing really well financially. And when I got to MVP, we had 300 employees at the time, and I actually met with every single one of them. I drove to every single hospital we had. It was 3 states at the time. It was a lot of driving my first 90 days. And I met every single team member and I heard their stories. And I actually didn't know this, but most people in the veterinary world live below the poverty line. And veterinarians actually don't charge a lot, especially in the general practice. I think, not to defend or get into war, because I know this might be unpopular, but I think a lot of the big ticket prices that you hear about in veterinary medicine or that are in the press, those actually occur at specialty hospitals or ER hospitals. But most of the community is general practice, which is kind of going to your primary care doctor. And the folks that live there truly, when I met these folks, some of them are making $12, $13, $14 an hour. And I heard their stories and I heard how they had to live paycheck to paycheck. And honestly, it broke my heart. And I very quickly, after about 90 days, I said, okay, we have to change this. We have to move the paraprofessional teams in our hospitals above the poverty line. We have to move them into the middle class so that this can be something that can actually be a career. Because what was happening in the profession was folks wanted to get in because they loved animals, and then they quickly left because they couldn't afford to stay. And ultimately, the ramification of that is that doctors were constantly working with brand new people, and they were constantly turning their teams over, and that is exhausting. And what happens in that environment is you really don't have anyone you can trust or delegate to. And so doctors were doing everything in a hospital and literally burning themselves out. You may not know this, but veterinary medicine is actually one of the highest rates of suicide of any profession there is in any industry because of this burnout. And so I became really passionate about trying to solve that problem. And so when I went back to Shore and the board, I said, look, I'll do this if you are supportive of the fact that we're not going to have any dividends come out of this company and that all the free cash flow is going to go back into the ecosystem. And we are consciously going to try to raise paraprofessional wages from where they're at $13, $14 an hour to hopefully over $30 an hour. And that comes at a really big cost. And the argument I made was that if we did that, we would have more sustainable teams and that doctors would thrive in that environment. And ultimately, healthy, thriving doctors would lead to healthy, thriving practices, and it would work. And it did. And so we have been able to move literally thousands of people to make this a career for them. It's something we're really proud of. I know our doctors are, and it's the place that people want to come and be a part of. And I think that's something that's really cool, and was fortunate to be a part of something that special.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I could talk for days more about that, but we're here to talk about the Search Fund today. So given that journey and where you are, why are you back in search?
You know, it's interesting. I always wanted to be a teacher. So my background, grandparents immigrated from Lebanon, and my dad grew up with basically nothing. And so did my mom. I think from an early age, they had high hopes for me, and they wanted me to, frankly, take our family to a different level. And those were my dad's dreams. And I think that had a profound impact on me. I only share that with you because when I graduated from college, I went to my father and said, Dad, I want to be a teacher. I want to teach high school history and be a football coach. I love to teach. I'm a teacher at heart. And he said, no. You're going to go into business, which is why I worked so hard and paid all this money for you to go to the University of Notre Dame, and you're going to go into business and you're going to do that. And I was like, yes, sir. And here I am, 46 years old, and I have the freedom to do what I want. And I have learned a lot about business because I could probably write 3 books about all the mistakes I've made. And I want to give back, and I want to teach, and I want to help people that are still at a point in their career where they want to learn. And having sat on a number of boards over the course of my life, what I have found is that more experienced CEOs really don't want to learn. Board meetings are a check the box exercise, and that's okay. I get it. And to some extent, I'm probably guilty of that myself in companies that I've run. But searchers are at a point where they actually are seeking for the help and they want it. And I think to be in that kind of environment, and I'm really passionate about investing and learning about new industries and new businesses, it allows me to satisfy all the things that are life-giving for me.
And for those of us who aren't familiar with the search space, will you just give us the quick and dirty version of what that even means when we're saying search? What does the structure of that look like?
So basically, the quick version is 1 or 2 people decide to search. Either you go solo or you get a partner, and you raise somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million to essentially pay yourself a small salary and keep the lights on, pay for flights, hotels, meals, entertainment. You get the drill. And you basically fly around the country looking for a business to buy. That's it. And then if you're fortunate enough to get a business that you like under letter of intent that you're going to acquire it, and now you need 10, 15, 20, $25 million to actually buy it, you go back to those investors that gave you the $500,000 or $1 million up front, and you say, hey, now you can write a bigger check. And the thought is that searcher is going to be able to make you multiples on your investment. And so that's basically what a search fund is. And so that searcher literally dedicates their life to move to where the business is. They immerse themselves in it every single day, and their job is to grow it and ultimately create value for the shareholders and themselves.
So let's go back to that stage in your particular journey, the early stages of your search experience. Give us a little bit of history there on how you identified your market and your company, and how did you get started? Just go back to that so that there's some further insight for anyone who's in the search fund today, which I'm sure you've already talked to them, but anyone listening, say this is what it actually looks like firsthand.
So first of all, I got to give a lot of credit to my partner, Dan Henn, who is really thoughtful and I think a very good investor. And Dan and I would basically get together and talk about what spaces we thought had legs, for lack of a better word. And keep in mind, we searched from 07 to 09. So when we started in 07, it was high times in this country. It was great. And then 08 hit. And I mean, people were scared and investors were scared to deploy capital, and we were scared. And so we had to be super thoughtful about effectively what's going to be recession proof, because we were living in a time where people that we knew were losing their homes. And so we thought healthcare would be a safe place to be. And so we spent time and we ultimately found StatLab, and that business, what StatLab did is they sold products that are used in cancer testing. And ultimately we came to the conclusion that if we're in healthcare, no matter what happens in the broader economy, people are still going to go to the doctor, in particular people that have cancer, and they're going to get tested irrespective of what's happening because it's that essential. And so ultimately we had to be really judicious about picking things that we thought could frankly be financeable, because at that time, very few businesses were financeable at all, because of most businesses have some sort of cyclicality to them. And we found one that fortunately didn't.
And how do you take that and translate to the critical eye your searchers need to have on today's market? How do you take that experience? That was a in your face. I mean, it wasn't when you started, but by the time OA hit, the sky was falling. How do you translate that today to, even if the sky doesn't feel like it's falling, being hypercritical about the industry and the particular business you're looking for?
It's really hard because the last decade have been high times for investors. I mean, especially when interest rates were, effectively people could borrow money for free. And obviously that's changed a little bit here in the last, year and a half. And I think to some extent that's actually helping add some discipline that I think had been lacking. But the reality is that most people searching have only seen success almost no matter what, because no matter what has been bought in the last 10 years, not only did it kind of go up and to the right, you got multiple expansion because the amount of capital trying to be put to work is so much now in the country that I think we had that. And so I think it's important that searchers surround themselves with investors that have had a lot of reps, a lot of pattern recognition. I obviously think Shore can say that we've had some pattern recognition on things that work and don't work. And all you can do is give the searcher your honest opinion. At the end of the day, they get to make their decision. And I think what you want to show them is, I genuinely care about you. You're the one moving to city XYZ. You're the one putting your reputation on the line. Respectfully, whether the deal goes well or not for you, investors are going to be fine. That just is the reality. I don't want to sound harsh about it, but that's just the truth. And so I really am trying to think about your next decade and where you want to spend your time. And I have the ability to be neutral about it, where you're so in your search and frankly, maybe exhausted or fatigued of searching, that maybe all I can say is when I was searching, sometimes I was trying to find the deal within the deal just so I could get something done and stop the pain of actually searching. And I think surrounding yourself with folks that are actually going to be honest with you and have your best interest at heart is important. And I think we're going to be that.
So when you think about your time, what are a couple of things you did right in the search process?
Well, we worked really hard. I can tell you that we held each other accountable and Dan was the best partner. And I think I'm proud of the effort that we gave it every day. We didn't take any days off, even though it was hard. We went to a new city almost every other week and we met with probably 10 to 15 intermediaries in those cities for 2 straight years. I would say effort and I would say consistency of follow-up. And I think we did a pretty good job of attending some industry trade shows and being connected in those spaces.
What about things you did wrong? Anything come to mind that you did wrong?
How much time do we have? I think if I were to synthesize that question, it would be, we spent too much time on things that we had absolutely no chance to win. We spent too much time talking to brokers or intermediaries where we had absolutely no chance to win. And I think our naivety was part of what allowed us to actually just get in the game and search. You have to have a certain amount of naivety or almost like confidence that you can do the impossible just to even get in the game. And so naturally, anybody that thinks that way is like, we can win this deal, even though there was no chance that we were going to be able to compete with a private equity firm on something or work with an advisor that did multiple deals. They're not going to sell a business to a searcher because you're not going to be a repeat client for them. And they're going to do everything in their power to advise their client against you. And I think, having not understood that and time being our most valuable commodity, we wasted a ton of it.
So when you think about that, you think about those characteristics, what makes a good searcher?
First of all, I'm not sure I was a good searcher. It's a good question. I think a good searcher is someone that is disciplined, persistent, doesn't get discouraged by the word no, because I promise you're going to hear it a lot. And someone that can ultimately, for lack of a better way to put it, you have to be a good salesperson insofar as, here's the reality. The reality is it's going to come down to one moment. It's going to come down to you probably taking that owner to dinner and potentially their spouse to dinner or their partner, their significant other, and convincing them that you are the person or you are the team that they should trust their life's work to. And then you have to convince their advisors. Then you have to convince their employees. And at the end of the day, I think good searchers are great communicators and they can show their passion and conviction and make you believe that they can be trusted with the thing that you probably value the most.
That's pretty intense. I'm not going to lie. I'm struck by the reality of what you're describing as that being successful and closing that deal is not coming down to how you manage a spreadsheet or what your promising is or how you do any of the numbers. It comes down to you sitting across the table with someone and their significant other and building a relationship and building trust and those kinds of things.
I unequivocally believe that.
So why Shore? You talked about you and Justin having a conversation. Why does this make sense for Shore?
So we left this part out of the intro, but part of the recapitalization of MVP, the veterinary roll-up, was that we got to merge it with Southern Veterinary Partners, which is another veterinary roll-up that Shore had an equity stake in. And it allowed me to leave the business on a day-to-day basis because the SVP CEO is going to be the CEO of the combined company. And he's great and wonderful. And it's great. And we're friends and it's great. And I was sitting with Justin at dinner one night and he asked me what I wanted to do next. What was I passionate about? And I told him that I wanted to invest in search funds and that I wanted to be back in that community more on a full-time basis and that I wanted to be with searchers and in their life and in their cap table. And he asked me about it. We had a long conversation. By the end of it, he said, how would you like to partner partner on it instead of you going alone. And here's what I have to offer. And I can give you access to the Shore ecosystem. And I got really energized by that because I only have so much individual bandwidth. And one of the challenges that I had as a searcher was that my investors only had so much individual bandwidth. And so I wasn't able to really leverage a lot of that experience. And so I thought to myself, wow, Shore has scalable infrastructure. This could be exciting. And ultimately, we could build the kind of investor I always dreamed of having in my cap table. And so that's what I got out of it, is something I'm proud of to bring to the community. I think the way Justin and Shore look at it is this is an opportunity to get connected to some of the most talented MBA students in the world and have them become affiliated with Shore, even if we have a small portion of someone's cap table, even if we're a small portion of their deal. We're certainly not in control. We don't govern it. We don't control the board, but they get to know us and they see that. Well, there's so many outcomes that can happen with that searcher. Think about what happens in 5 to 7 years after they sell their business. We might love them and they might love us. We might ask them to be on a board of one of our portfolio companies. Or what if we love the business so much that we try to buy it from the rest of the cap table? Or what if the searcher is great and he's like me or she's like me and just a little less lucky? Because like I said, I came down to my last $17,000 when I searched. We almost hung our shingle. What if their search isn't successful, but they're really talented? We have so much going on at Shore that we would love to have them as a CXO or in one of our portfolio companies, or maybe they come work at the fund. If you think about just the relationships that we can build, the possibilities are endless over a 20, 25, 30-year horizon, which is sort of how Justin thinks of the role. And so I think from his perspective and Shore's perspective, it's a way to build relationships that create massive optionality on things that we can't even predict yet, but I think could be really exciting for both the firm and for the searcher themselves.
I'm going to go back to something you said about the Shore ecosystem, because you've experienced that as a CEO in the Shore portfolio. Will you just draw those two ideas together? What do you mean when you say the Shore ecosystem? And then what does that mean to you now as you think about the searchers?
Well, for me, really, Shore's fascinating insofar as they invest in really small companies, right? They're a microcap fund by definition, but they bring Fortune 500 resources to microcap companies. And so when I say the ecosystem, I'm talking about all of the resources that I know of, not the least of which, frankly, Anderson, is you, right? And Michael Burcham and what you guys do at the Leadership Academy. So for those who don't know, all I can tell you is my company, Mission Veterinary Partners, we had countless people go through a program that Shore has called the Leadership Academy. And Anderson here is one of the leaders with his colleague, Michael Burcham. And we were able to literally help people who had never learned those kinds of skills to do that. Now, what other private equity firm is able to offer their vice president, director level, managerial level, supervisor level folks that kind of training? That's just one example. We have the Centers of Excellence here at Shore. This is where we take all of our marketing professionals or all of our CFOs or all of our heads of HR or all of our business intelligence folks, and we put them in cohorts with one another. And I think, now we have like 45 or maybe 50 portfolio companies. So when you think about being in a room full of marketing professionals, of folks that are starting out at maybe 3 or 4 million of EBITDA to companies like mine that have 200 million of EBITDA, think about the knowledge that you're going to have in that room in terms of not only, hey, how do I deal with the challenges of doing this at a $3 million enterprise, but where do I want to go to make it a 10, 20, 30, 40? Guess what? You're going to be in a room full of people that have been there, done that, and they can help you. And if that's too much for you personally as the entrepreneur to do, great. Send your marketing person, send your HR person, whatever it is. The other thing I'd say is we have something like 300 independent board members that are now connected to the Shore family. We likely have someone that is in an industry that you're excited about. Could be a river guide, could help you navigate maybe which companies to buy or potentially introduce you to companies, or just sit on your board or provide you just informal advice. And so when I think about the ecosystem, honestly, those are just 3 examples of things that we bring to bear. But as you know, there's many more. And I think having worked in the Shore family for 6 years, it really is unlike anything I've ever been a part of. And I'm proud to bring it to the search community.
And you know this clearer than I, and so you can help educate me in this question as well. But some might say there's a perception of a conflict of interest between Shore searchers and the microcap funds and those kinds of things. We just talk about what that is, and then how are you navigating that? How are you working through those perceived conflicts of interest?
Well, I think perceived is a great way to put it, because I do think that they are perceived, and truly it ends there, because I don't actually think we have a conflict. And here's why. And I want to help searchers win against private equity, and I think they can. And it ultimately comes down to this. Private equity, including Shore, requires the entrepreneur or founder to stay as the CEO and roll a bunch of equity. So where I'm going with this is it's situational, Anderson. We might actually both want the same company, or we may want something in the same industry. First of all, the odds of that actually happening are really, really low. When you think about literally the hundreds of thousands of companies that could be for sale, the odds that Shore, the fund, and a Shore-backed searcher are literally fighting for the same company are really, really minuscule. But in the event that it actually happened, I would say, A, it was going to happen anyways, whether we were in your cap table or not. But B, I can help you win in that situation as a searcher, because you can go up and say, hey, founder, entrepreneur, do you really want to sit here for the next 5, 7, 10 years and have to roll a bunch of equity and still be the person? Or would you like to take a bunch of cash and go to the Bahamas? How does that sound? Because as a searcher, I can be the succession plan. I can be your long lost son or daughter and be your succession plan, and you get to go retire. And that is a very compelling pitch that no private equity firm, including Shore, could make anyway. So I think we delineate that in terms of the situation. And like I said, if we were going to be looking at it anyways, we were going to be looking at it anyway. Because here's what I can tell you. I can promise you this, and this you can take to the bank. We are not going to show our searcher deal flow to the fund to create competitive tension. There is going to be a wall there of extreme secrecy, and no one is going to violate it. I can guarantee you that.
Well, and even your example is one that there are different premises upon which a founder seller might partner with a searcher than private equity.
100%.
What they're looking for out of a partnership, one is a retirement plan and the other is a partnership and an ongoing active business relationship. They do very different outcomes.
They are. And I can tell you, having been a searcher, the entrepreneur that wants to continue to be the CEO and have a partner never is going to sell to you as a searcher anyway. There's 0% chance because they don't want you in their business or they don't want you around, and they certainly don't want to let anyone else be the CEO. And so I think that's a really astute observation, and you're spot on.
So give me a little bit of context about where, Mike, the search fund is today at Shore Capital, just in terms of the state of the process.
So we actually raised our first fund. It's a $65 million fund we raised. And so we want that fund to be dedicated to 30 searchers, okay? Because we think that 30 searchers will need that much capital between their search and the deals they do. We have partnered with 12 amazing searchers and teams already. And so that effectively leaves about 18 spots that we're trying to find the right partner. And as soon as we find and get our commitments in those cap tables, I think we'll start to raise another fund. And so that's kind of where we're at. We're really thrilled about the 12 teams we have going today. And we're really excited about the pipeline that we've built and some of the conversations we've had with some of the top MBA students across the country.
I'm curious, take me into one of those conversations, Mike. You're getting access to an interest from, some of the, like you say, the top MBA grads. Who's right for this kind of an opportunity? And who can you sit in front of and say, you're brilliant, you're talented, but this is maybe not for you? If somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, well, this search thing may be interesting, just give me a sense of, like, when you're looking at that, having an honest conversation, what's an indicator that this is the right match? And what's an indicator that you're great, but this is not for you?
I think sometimes when the job markets are not great, people decide to search because they figure, well, I really can't get anything better than this. And when job markets are really competitive and people are hiring and someone still chooses search despite having a huge opportunity cost that they're walking away from, I get really excited about people that I know have a massive opportunity cost, but are doing this because they literally have to. Like, they're the kind of people that say to themselves, when I'm 85 years old, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life, even though I have this amazing job at this amazing firm that would have otherwise paid me a lot of money. I'm going to give all that up because this is like in my soul. Entrepreneurship is who I am. I can't get around it. As opposed to when someone's like, well, this is the best option I have. I think that is probably the first thing that came to mind when you asked me that. So I would say, maybe one thing we could talk about is we talked a little bit about the perception of conflicts. What about the perception that, like, Shore is this big bad private equity firm, and if things don't go well, you're going to get outed as CEO?
So say more about that, Mike, in terms of that perception and how you see reality of this happening and working within the Shore ecosystem.
I think I'd say a couple things. One is Shore started with really humble beginnings. I love when Justin tells the story of how he actually had to negotiate the price of the first conference room table that he ever bought in his first office because they couldn't afford anything else. And if anyone has been through ups and downs, and if anyone has invested in lower middle market firms and microcap firms and understands that those firms actually have to go through J curves to go from good to great, it's Shore Capital. And so I actually think the opposite, that we're not in a rush to go fire a bunch of entrepreneurs, but rather be alongside them in their J-curve, because I know I went through multiple J-curves at StatLab and multiple J-curves at MVP, and Shore as a fund has gone through them, and all of Shore's portfolio companies have gone through them. I know because I know a lot about the portfolio companies and the J-curves that they all went through. And I think sometimes, when you hear about all the successes, you don't hear about the trials and tribulations that it took to get there. And I can unequivocally tell you that the number one reason why Shore and we are doing it is to build relationships with some of the most talented people in the country, and the opportunity to be alongside them in that journey. And frankly, what I can tell you is that I think some of the best relationships and partnerships I built have all had moments of adversity, and we've gone through those moments of adversity together. And it actually creates a bond that's actually stronger than when everything goes well. And so I think, that's not to say that everything will be perfect all the time. And it's not to say that maybe, there might be this one anomaly of really bad actor and some unethical person, but outside of, I think, true character deficiencies and flaws, the spirit of what we're trying to do is the actual opposite of that, and rather build people up and have you say one day that Shore was the partner that helped me grow the most or helped me deal with that situation the most, so that you do want to stay in our ecosystem one way or another for a majority or if not all of your career.
If you enjoyed this episode, check out our other Microcap Moments episodes at www.shorecp.university/podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. Here you will also find our Bigger, Stronger, Faster and Everyday Heroes series, each highlighting the people and stories that make investing in the lower middle market unique. This podcast was produced by Shore Capital Partners, with story and narration by Anderson Williams, recording by Austin Johnson, editing by Real Audiobooks, sound design, mixing, and mastering by Mark Galloop of Real Audiobooks. Special thanks to Mike Aubrey. This podcast is the property of Shore Capital Partners, LLC. None of the content herein is investment advice, an offer of investment advisory services, nor a recommendation or offer relating to any security. See the Terms of Use page on the Shore Capital website for other important information.